I'm apologies for absence from Joe Hale, who would normally be chairing this. I'm therefore chairing it in his absence, and I'm doing it from online because I wasn't able to get into the Guildhall, unfortunately, because of the last minute notice. I understand we've got Alan Jeffrey and Paul Ralph in the room itself, and everybody else is online. So welcome. Are there any other apologies? Is it Linda James going to be a bit late, Michelle? We've had no other apologies.
apologies.
No other apologies. Okay. Are there any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interests at all? No. And then we just note the prohibition of whipped votes, which is the usual thing, and then go on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which are so there's a couple of pages. So page what for accuracy from Monday the 19th of May on page 1 and page 2. Are we happy that those minutes are accurate? I'm going to take silence as consent. Thank you. In that case, we're going to move to public question time. I understand we haven't had any public questions received. No, okay. And in that case, then the item 6 is the grants in the place directors. And can I welcome Councillor Rob Stewart, who, as well as being lead, is also responsible for the economy, finance, and strategy. Mark Wade, Director of Place. Paul Ralph, Strategic Economic Regeneration Manager, Planning and City Regeneration. I think we have Phil Holmes in the room as well. So welcome everybody. Rob, do you want to introduce this report?
Very briefly, Chair. Again, this report, I know it contains a number of different grants that are administered by the economic regeneration teams. I think the report is quite self-explanatory in terms of the detail it goes into. There are a vast range of different grants in there that the panel may be interested in. But I won't say too much. I'd want to leave more time for members to ask the questions they would need, Chair. And obviously we've got Paul, Phil, and some other officers with us who can help with the technical questions around the administration of the grants. But happy to come in as and when needed to add some political context if needed.
Thank you, Rob. Paul, do you want to add anything from an officer point of view, or any other officers?
Did you want me to run through any of the detail, or do I take this read? Everyone's read.
I think we've all read the report. So if you want to highlight anything in particular at all, Paul, that'd be helpful.
Sure. I think I just wanted to, I guess, throughout the questions, what I've tried to convey, I've used Shared Prosperity Fund as an example because that covers a huge range of delivery in the Place Directorate and beyond, actually, at the moment. And it's been quite a unique grant programme, so it's quite useful to set against some of the Welsh Government procedures, that timing, for example, but also just the compliance internally, Accounting Instruction 16 in particular from the Finance Department, which controls things like member consultation and ensuring due diligence when we're applying for and accepting grants. I guess perhaps the only other thing is the timing of the way that funding is administered is challenging, in as much as every funder has their own reason for issuing funding, and the timescales rarely align because different organisations do things in different ways, which does make it difficult for budgeting purposes, for example. But those are probably the key ones, but happy to go into detail on any of the questions in the report.
That's lovely. Thank you, Paul. Okay, we've got some questions. I got Paxton Hood-Williams wants to start off. Paxton?
Sorry, Chairman. Basically, what I should have done is declared an interest as a member of the RAG committee, which administers makes a lot of decisions in respect of the SPF funding.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, thanks, Paxton. Okay, so questions. I'll start off then. One thing I noticed, Paul, is a lot of these grants are, as you say in the report, top down. The government sort of says this is what we have on offer, and you have to bid for it. How does that distort the department's priorities and the council's priorities in terms of how they use their budgets and in terms of what we want to pursue? Or do we have a lot more leeway than the report gives the impression of?
It does depend on the source of the grant. So, I mean, I think I've made the point in the report that probably applies across various council departments, that sometimes what is termed a grant is a means of budget allocation, which does give the issuing Welsh Government departments the ability to control what the money is spent on, and that will be on a financial year allocation. And I mean, that's understandable in some ways. It does mean that policy formulated at Welsh Government Cardiff level, and the same would apply to UK government grants in some instances, does give a level of insurance that policy directives are being met. So take, for example, the Transforming Towns programme and the Town Centre First policy that that the Regeneration and Housing Directorate in Welsh Government use. It does mean that we couldn't just use the money for whatever anywhere. We have to concentrate on town centres with that particular pot. So in some ways it skews it positively. Then at the other end of the spectrum, UK Shared Prosperity Fund has given us extraordinary flexibility. So they have set certain parameters that we have to spend the money on, three key priorities of communities, business, and people and skills. And within those broad headings, we've got significant latitude then to wrap that money around some of the Welsh Government delivery, but also particularly for members and the local administration, the ability to deliver both manifesto commitments and needs across the county that aren't maybe met by some of the more top-down arrangements from Welsh Government. So it's complementary, and the ability to have a flexible pot to achieve that is quite helpful, in the sense that some of the bigger ticket items are covered by the larger programmes, but then it's useful to have, as I think many of you that have interacted with me on various projects, you do sometimes need that flexibility to do that intractable problem that no other grant programme will meet, which currently Shared Prosperity Fund is achieving.
Okay, Rob, you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, just quickly to add to what Paul said, I think it's worth noting as well that obviously Swansea's done particularly well out of the Transforming Towns Fund, receiving more than its fair share of the Welsh split. And again, that's down to the work that Paul and the team have done in terms of making sure that we're working in line with Welsh Government's aspirations for delivery of that. And of course, we've got a really good record of delivering out schemes within Swansea. So that's one thing to know. And just on the shared prosperity, I think the other thing that's demonstrated is where we have greater control over how those funds are directed. Again, the way in which Paul and the team have not just created a position locally but regionally, where we've been really successful in targeting funds and demonstrating even better outcomes, I think, than the previous arrangements through Welsh Government, where we've reduced administration costs but improved the speed of delivery and the focus of the funds, is something that I think I'm keen that whatever comes after is the best of both systems. So we retain what we've been able to create locally, but also build in the strategic element where necessary to do that. And I think, again, I think that the guys should be really proud of what we've achieved in SPF. The one thing I think critical to all of these grants, when you look at it, is to make sure that you have the terms and conditions and criteria up front. Because again, if you go back to Shared Prosperity, that was one of the major challenges. Even though we knew the quantum of the money that was coming, we didn't know the criteria early days, and it took a long time for us to get clarity at the previous UK government for that. Once we had it, obviously we were able to motor, and again, kudos to the guys for the work they put in and the way they got that up and running. And I think, I place the way in which we've been able to run Shared Prosperity here against any of the previous ways of distributing the funds, because I think it's been a really brilliant way to get really local benefits and local impacts out there.
A lot of these grants need match funding, or we need to put money up for that. Does that tend to and sometimes you don't really know where you are until the grants work its way through. Does it tend to distort the budget process, particularly in capital? Or do we find difficulty trying to meet the match funding sometimes because of that?
Shall I come in there?
Yeah, sure.
It can do, but I think what's really important, something that as a council we're good at, is having a pipeline of schemes always on the go and ready to deliver, because sometimes windfalls do come in year where there's an underspend in perhaps another part of Welsh Government that gets released back into the system. So having live projects is an important part of that, and there is risk attached to that, as the timescales don't always necessarily line up. But if you know you've got, say, the Transforming Towns grant allocated for the following financial year, and you've got capital availability in the core budget for the council in the current financial year, then you know you can safely spend one against the other, assuming that, of course, the grant offer letter has been issued by Welsh Government. That can go to the wire, and it's put grey hairs on my head a few times, but it does tend to work out. The timescales, the length in capital particularly, is challenging simply because so many things are out of your control, be it weather, a planning condition, something unexpected happening, something in the ground that you weren't expecting to find. All those things affect timescales, and there's no capital scheme that doesn't affect. Even building a garden shed will do that to you. So it's these big schemes. It does mean we've got to be really careful. But as long as we've got full understanding of what money is available and working closely with the Welsh Government officials on timelines, it does come together ultimately.
Okay, right, Di Jenkins.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. The question that I've got is with these fundings and grants, for example, active travel. So it seems that you can apply for the grants, and I'm just picking that one out as an example. But then when you've got the actual infrastructure down, obviously then you've got to maintain that infrastructure, right? So with the like active travel routes, and would you be able to sort of, when you've got the infrastructure down, is there a possibility that when active travel grants come up, instead of doing another route and another route, could you apply for grants that maintain the actual infrastructure that's already in place? Because if we keep on building, and it's only example is there, we're not picking on active travel. It could be anything really, but if you're putting it down and putting it down, there's no budget for maintenance, and where's that coming from? That's my question.
Peter, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Sorry, Chair, you're on mute. I didn't know who you're calling in. Sorry.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, sorry, go on, Rob.
Yeah, I think Councillor Jenkins raises a very good point, and it's something we did flag early days of active travel, where the schemes which were successfully funded by Welsh Government didn't have an element of ongoing maintenance included in the bids. I believe that's now been rectified. On the ground in Swansea, obviously, our teams have continued to take on those new routes. And we've made arrangements as a council to make sure that we've bolstered the budgets in highways and elsewhere to be able to allow the teams to manage that, because we can't expect them to continually add to the network without increasing their budget. But it was an omission in the early days of active travel where ongoing maintenance was not part of the bid process, and we did raise that with Welsh Government at the time. I believe it's been rectified now in terms of current bids and future bids. Again, Paul may want to comment more widely on this, but certainly for the larger city centre funds, whenever we do, as we've done with the arena, as we will do with Castle Gardens and others, there is always a maintenance sinking fund that is established alongside it. So again, you would expect lower maintenance in the early days of a build because it's new, but you have a sinking fund, so you're able then to cover that maintenance costs over the term or over the life of the building. So that is built into our plans when we do cost up buildings and developments in the city centre, especially on the bigger, larger schemes.
Okay, Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
That's excellent. Thank you very much.
Sure, if I could add, I mean, it's one of the purposes of within Accounting Instruction 16, the notification of grants awards process that we follow with finance does ask these questions. So it does ask, what future liabilities there might be, how much of that is covered by the grant. And on revenue grants, for example, that would include redundancy costs where necessary for fixed term posts, for example. So there is an element of planning required in the preparation of the bid in the first place. And if it's not covered by the grant scheme, which sometimes it isn't, but the exit strategy from that grant does have to be addressed, usually within an application form, to give an idea of how future liabilities are going to be managed.
Okay. Mike White. Sorry,
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to pass the point plus to Paul. When we get the grant in, have the team got a scoping process in place to ensure that the project is on course, within line with the funding for the project?
Yes. So as an example, all of the Shared Prosperity Fund grants that we've awarded, as an example, have a timeline attached to them of deliverables with key milestones plotted on a chart, as well as most grant programs have a routine monitoring process, which could be monthly, quarterly, 6 monthly, or if it's a smaller, it might be a one-off situation if it's a smaller grant, and the team will expect a monitoring return to be received, which will usually be a financial return comprising a transaction list of the detail of what the money's been spent on and against which eligible spend categories, because usually an award does contain you in your application, you usually set out a series of cost headings that you'll be spending the money against and a budget. So the team will monitor against that, and if it needs to vary, it can be varied in consultation with the funder, which includes us on Shared Prosperity Fund, as long as it's in line with the aspirations of the original application. That's usually also accompanied by a summary of what deliverables have been achieved over the last period, be that number of people trained, for example, or progress against the capital build, any match funding that is included, a declaration of how far that has gone, and any on Shared Prosperity Fund, actually, we've asked for both a summary of the communications undertaken, but also impact. We ask applicants to tell us how they think their project has impacted on communities, and that does result in a lot of colour as to the difference activity is making on the ground. So that's so we've been able to add that other programs don't ask for.
Okay. I'll just go back to the application process. How do you actually prioritise which grants to pursue, especially when opportunities arise mid-year? And is there any examples where a grant has significantly influenced or altered the council's strategic or operational plans?
Ooh. I think there's constant demand for projects of all shapes and sizes, alongside commitments, manifesto commitments for the administration, for example. So I think from my point of view, when I'm getting inquiries from many of you in the meeting and others, it's a thing of looking at all the priorities that we are operating against, be they the corporate priorities, the administration's priorities, the aims and objectives of the department, the requirements of the grant programme, and you need to build up that knowledge in order to make recommendations as to what to pursue. There are usually ongoing waiting lists of concept schemes, projects that require support. My email address is the most popular one in the council, I think, other than the leaders. But that does give me a good grasp of where pressures are. So, for example, when Shared Prosperity Fund came along, whilst there was a gap in the detailed information from UK government, as the leader said, we used that time to look at our regional economic strategy, the council's priorities, and what we've understood over a number of years of where pressures were coming from around us as a team, because a lot of the funding inquiries that are more generic come to my team, and trying to distribute the money on that basis as fairly as possible. Something time scales would also affect that, and often there are urgent pressures and things that need to be resolved quickly. It's quite a generic answer, but it's kind of a filtering process, and it's an ongoing series of pipelines across numerous types of activity, be that business community, people of skills, whatever it is. And ultimately, we have to make those recommendations to you as members as to what is deemed appropriate to support. Oftentimes is tight, so maintaining an understanding of those pressures, certainly from my point of view, is fundamental, and linking with other officers across the council to understand that on a council-wide basis. It's really, as well as we have, for example, our Regeneration Swansea partnership, where external partners feed in as well, their understanding of pressures. So we can't support everything, and not everything is eligible for every programme, but having a broader awareness of all that stuff coming in does mean that we can respond when an opportunity arises, if that helps.
Okay. Rob, do you want to?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to that, which Paul alluded to, I said, you know, it's been very rare, to my knowledge, that we've not been able to accept a grant that's been turned up mid-year or an underspend. And I think that's due to the fact that we do have a very large capital programme with a long pipeline of projects that are, you know, pretty well worked up and ready to go. So if money does turn up, we want to be ready to be able to use it. And certainly where, you know, if there are underspends across Wales, we're always happy to take the money and to make sure we find a project that's suitable to make use of it. And I think that's something that not every council can do, because not every council is in the same position in terms of its development pipeline. And again, you know, that's good for us, but it's always through the lens as well of, is it the right grant to take? Are there things that come along with that grant that we wouldn't want to sign up to? But the majority of time, I think we're able to take extra money, and that's only to the benefit of the schemes that we want to fund.
Okay. So in terms of managing these grants, I mean, do we have, is the current staffing level sufficient to managing the increasing complexity and volume of grant programs? And in particular, I know we've got, you get, I think it's 4% from UK SPF for administrative funding. If that was reduced, would that cause a problem for us?
If it was reduced below 4%, I think it would, because that's probably about as low as you can get. I mean, in the past, schemes would have up to 25% running costs. You know, previous versions of the rural programme that Councillor Paxton will be familiar with, the running costs were far higher, or the amount of money made available for lead body functions. Whereas on this scheme, I think we're below 4%. It's probably more like 3.5%, which does mean that the bulk of the money is going to delivery, and I mean that wouldn't include frontline delivery staff within projects. You know, the basic process of receiving claim forms, issuing award letters, and monitoring can just about be done for 3.5%. It's maybe less glossy. I have to say, I mean, you know, some programs are very shiny, and the PR is probably a lot better than it is, for example, on Shared Prosperity Fund, because we're focusing the money on delivery, and then we rely on the council comms team working closely with them in order to put out the good news stories. And maybe that's something we could spend a bit more on. But from where I sit, it's the amount of demand on me to support various projects from these pots, the demand from all of you, it's more efficient to be able to support those needs than having a glossy programme. The leader may want to take a different view to that.
Do you want to add to that, Rob? Or?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Paul. And again, you know, if we need to find, Paul's got a small team there, but you know, in terms of the costs of running that team compared to the sheer amount of money that Paul's team are able to secure for the council to achieve its aims, it more than pays for itself. And look, just want to put it in context. Our understanding is when Welsh Government were managing the RDF funds, I think the top slice was about 20%. The administration was about 20% of the costs, and the speed at which Paul's team are able to turn stuff around and get money out the door to those local businesses and funders that need the support is significantly quicker. So not only is it cheaper to administer, but faster to administer, and to my mind, a much better way of doing business, making the decisions more locally. And that's the you know, this clear message we sent back to UK and Welsh Government, is that the arrangements that we have in place in Wales now are working really well. Yes, we do need to overlay for Shared Prosperity Fund some further strategic aims to make sure that we don't have any gaps in terms of reaching that strategic aim, because again, as I said earlier, under the original SPF program with the previous UK government, you were forced into making very tactical award decisions because you had to get the money out the door in a very short period of time. That forced people to behave in a certain way. So we do need to, rebalance that a little bit, but absolutely we shouldn't go back to what we had with the RDF in terms of a process. I would still like to make sure that we get back to a position, and the chair will know this, of accessing European funds again one day directly, and making sure that, of course, we live up to the original ask, which was not a penny less than Europe, and we've changed that now into making sure that we drive UK government to give us just not a penny less, but also the equivalent of what we would have had accounting for inflation over that period as well. So, in terms of the quantum of the fund, we want to see that grow. Pleased to see the money that's been locked in for the next 3 years, but actually, and the fact that I think we get, was it 22% of the entire UK's allocation in Wales. So in terms of a split, it's good. But the overall quantum of the fund, I'd still like to see that grow and increase as we proceed.
I think that's to draw a curtain over the way Welsh Government managed the ERDF, isn't it? I think, in terms of that. Okay, so but we do have sufficient staff to manage the thing. We're not struggling. I know, for example, that highways have struggled on a number of schemes because they were seemed understaffed at one stage. So I think they've slightly adjusted that now. But from our perspective, that we have sufficient staff to manage the schemes as it currently stands.
In terms of, can I just say something before Paul comes in? Sorry. I think, sorry, Paul. I was just going to say on the highways picture, and I think on any service, I think if we are fortunate to have more funding, I think the message I would give back on that is, if you get a 1-year blip, it's very difficult to skill the team up to a bigger size and then back down. So the point we make is that, yes, we'd welcome increase in funding, increase in grant, but that needs to be something that we can plan for over a 3-year period or more, because then we can scale up. It's the variability of having lots this year and then nothing the next year, lots next year. That inconsistency is really difficult to manage. But I got to say, even on highways, Bob Fenwick, Andrew Stevens and the team there have done a really good job in trying to make sure that we're able to deliver a much bigger programme this year, and again, hopefully next year, for the highways budget. But it is that inconsistency and variability without certainty that's the real challenge.
Okay. Sorry, Paul, you want to come in as well?
Yeah, just to add to what the leader said, I think, as things stand, there is sufficient staffing levels within the programme. But as the leader alluded to, without certainty over future years, and particularly Shared Prosperity Fund is an awful lot of delivery in one larger basket. So whilst it's great with the flexibility and the ability to use it across so many different themes within the council and other external organisations, the skills and expertise that the leader referenced, if there isn't an early understanding of a successor arrangement, as in this autumn, the inevitable would occur, and that's quite and I think the leader, you've made the points, haven't you, in various forums, of the potential impact if we don't get some certainty over future years fairly quickly.
Okay, Paxton.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that leads on to the question basically in which I was concerned. In respect to the grants that are received within the Police Directorate, are any of them in particular ones that we rely on to ensure that we maintain routine council operations, or are they all grants which can be used for things like the SPF grant for various purposes, short term, just one-off things?
I think I'll answer the same way I think Ben Smith answered, which is, if you look at it in a pure sense, the word everything's a grant, because even our core funding is the revenue support grant, which is a grant. So,
Yes.
Nothing is entirely guaranteed. I think what we've been really good at is to make sure that where we can deliver more by combining grants and what we consider probably more general sort of traditional core funding, even though it's a grant, together to do more, that's what we've done. And likewise, Paul and his team are looking across the piece there at all of the grant and funding opportunities and trying to pull those things together in the way that gives us the biggest bang for our buck in terms of pulling those together. So look, every grant is at risk, because it's a grant and it's not permanent funding. Even our revenue support grant is still a grant, and every should remember that, even though we all consider it to be locked in funding that we'll get the following year. So
but that takes us on to another point that we won't go down that route at this point in time, I'm sure, but that's another matter. But essentially what I'm looking at, just to have some satisfaction, I think, is that in terms of routine operations of the council, by and large, that we're not totally dependent, other than what you said in terms of RSG, and I appreciate all that, Rob, don't get me wrong, in terms of routine operations of the department.
So it depends which department and it depends which grant. I mean, look, there are core grants that assist in educational objectives. There are some really significant grants.
Sorry, I think we're talking about place at the moment in particular.
All right, in place. So, sorry, Paxton, I just being clear about the services. In place, there are some grants that assist us to do more. Some of those are internal grants because obviously we provide some significant additional finance for some of the activities undertaken in place. But there is a reasonable level of core funding in there. I would say if you were looking at an area where we've already raised that there are greater risks, I think those are in your poverty services, your employability services, the services that sit within the Social Services Directorate, because they are intertwined with many of the strands of SPF to help deliver the outcomes of the programmes. And those are the ones that we've made some very strong representations to both Welsh and UK government to say that's why we need the SPF funding to continue, because without it, it would harm the effectiveness of some of our core services, specifically in those areas.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
I imagine that revenue grants would be more difficult to manage if they were cut off than capital grants, simply because you've got people, staffing implications, etc. attached to that. Yeah. Okay, Phil Holmes, you want to come in? So.
Yeah, just to follow on what the leader said, I suppose as a rule of thumb, and there's always exceptions, isn't there? But as a rule of thumb, maintenance of infrastructure and that sort of thing is covered by core budgets, generally speaking, and then enhancements and upgrades and additions, that it would be grant sort of attracted work. And there are sort of differences across the police directorate, and I'm no expert in terms of the whole directorate, but based on my understanding, that would be a useful rule of thumb. Thank you.
Okay. Di.
Yeah, thank you for that. I noticed that one of the grants says the social housing grants, and I was wondering what's the average of successful grants applied for and received each year, and how many houses then does that go on and facilitate?
Are we talking revenue or capital, Di?
Capital.
Let Rob.
Di, if you're okay, I'll, because there's multiple parts of that question. I wouldn't want to give you an incomplete answer or an inaccurate answer on that one. So if it's okay, I'll take that one away and try and get you the information and send it round to all of the members of the committee.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of complexity in housing grants from Welsh Government, isn't there, which needs to be looked at properly. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other question? Okay. Just let's focus on. Do we have many unsuccessful grant applications? And if so, what lessons have we learned from those?
I'm pleased that there aren't that many unsuccessful applications. So often there can be a timing delay, so it may not be supportable in a particular financial year. Where we have had unsuccessful awards at first stage, for example, recently we had a Heritage Fund example That was partly down to pressure in the Heritage Fund budget and their ability to fund. It wasn't necessarily an issue with the project or the application. It was more a case of demand on the pot was such that only a small handful of the huge number of projects received could be supported, and that would often be the case. It's not usually down to the quality of the submission, it's the availability of funds is more of a determining factor. But the pipeline approach for example, the larger capital schemes under Transforming Towns, it's broadly a rolling program, and the pipeline shifts with priorities as they change over time. So the success rate is I'm pleased to say really high. It's very rare that we wouldn't put something ill-considered forward, if I can put it like that. And any advice we give to third parties as well, sometimes we advise people not to submit or to delay a submission until such time as they've done the extra work to make sure it has the best chance of success.
But at the same time, I mean, for example, Welsh Government priorities change. I mean, it's a really good example, the way that it's suddenly shifted away from road schemes towards active travel schemes. Do we need to obviously plan for those shifts in policy and priorities from the Welsh Government? We get lots of notice of those changes, and we able to plan accordingly, or do we find ourselves sometimes caught out by that?
I'll let the leader come in as well, but from where I sit, usually we've had sufficient warning that those changes are coming. There's usually certainly, for example, with Transforming Towns, we have monthly meetings with the officials, and any such things usually trailed well in advance, and that forms part of it. And it may as well mean, Chair, that it's not an outright no to that particular project, but it may need adjustment in order to fit, for example, the revised criteria.
And would that apply to SPF as well? Because, change of government, change of priorities.
The way the program is framed, because it's more regionally and locally centred, and by region that is the constituent local authorities to a greater or lesser extent. The change has been less seismic because the broad themes of the program are consistent, probably across the what both governments, both the previous and the current administration would support. But the lens we're reading the money through is local level and regional strategy. So in that sense, it's more resilient, perhaps, than maybe larger strategic approaches that have been taken in the past, in the sense of we can react far more quickly to what all of you as members are directing us in that respect, and what you're feeding back to us from businesses and communities.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Rob, or you?
No, I was going to say, I think Paul's covered it nicely, and again, even with active travel, I think the only times where we've had some changes to that has been in the order in which we deliver the schemes, possibly because there may be land ownership issues that are affecting our ability to proceed at a time we'd like, or other factors that may come into play. So again, I've not seen a huge amount of examples where we've not had sufficient notice from Welsh Government of a change, or UK Government in a change of how they want us to deliver certain things for them.
And where we haven't been able to proceed with the scheme, I think Walter Road is a good example of this. Have we found the Welsh Government receptive to us using that money elsewhere?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think it's about having a sensible, grown-up conversation with the Welsh Government. I think, we put forward, as you know, several years ago, a network that we wanted to create, which was accepted. In any plan, there are always going to be things that come forward faster than you expect, and some that'll be a bit slower. Given, I think the fair justification we gave that, we have the onset of the bus franchising, potentially the metro, some other changes, it made sense to throttle back one and throttle one forward. Welsh Government were happy to look at that and try and be as accommodating as possible with the funding.
Okay, but would they then expect you to return to that scheme at a later date, even though there might be difficulties with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the point remains that we are still intent on delivering the entire network because it's the network that's been signed off. I think what we might, when we do return, it might be depending on what other bus routes are running through there or whether we've got any changed prioritization of traffic or anything else at the time. We may amend the route slightly, but that's to be seen. It might be exactly as it was originally planned, but it wouldn't have made sense for us to deliver something and then have to dig it up and change it and do it another way in a few years' time. So, try and spend the money once and do it right, isn't it?
Okay, lovely. Right, anybody else got any questions on this report at all? No? Okay. Can I thank you then, Rob and Paul and all the other officers for coming along? It's very helpful, and we'll be obviously gathering all the evidence we get on this inquiry and putting it together into our final report. And we still have a few sessions ahead of us. So thank you very much indeed for coming along and helping us with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank
I think
you.
we've got one more item. My iPad's just died on me. We've got one more item on this agenda, which is the item 7, which is the project plan. Just so people know, which is on page 11. So the next session is on 31st of July, and we're looking at social services, including adult, child, and family. And then we move on then to external auditing grant awarding bodies. So just for people to know for the future. Okay, Seth. Oh, Di, sorry, you want to come in, Di?
Can I give my apologies in advance for the 31st of July? I'm in Nottingham that day.
Okay.
No
Thank
excuse.
you.
You can come on online, Di.
I'm in a field with
thank
a
you.
lot of arrows.
And Linda as well.
I'm also on holiday that time. I will not be here.
Gracious. I always avoid going on holiday during school term times, but there we are. outside of school terms. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks very much indeed for coming along. Apologies for having to share this online, and I hope I didn't exclude anyone like Alan, for example, who's been sitting there in the room. Maybe hopefully he didn't want to come in on that. Okay.
I
Thanks
did
very
share
much,
on
everybody.
occasions, press the button here, but I was, shall I say, ignored on this occasion. But nevertheless, some of the questions I wanted to ask have already been addressed. But
I think the best. I mean, if I'd been in the room, it would have been easier. I think the best thing is just put in Alan. To be honest, next time if we end up in a situation again, which I hope we don't. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.